Good friend. Bajamaya Kara. I'm delighted to introduce this interesting topic today. It's 25 years since WIP was founded. I think one of the biggest changes in the globe since then has been the deepening impact of the technological revolution. The Israeli historian Yuval Harari puts it in the same position as the agricultural revolution or the industrial one in terms of its impact on the world around us. I was reflecting on those changes myself. Back 25 years ago when I was back home in Salons being raised, we had one of the few telephones in the estate. So my neighbours used to always come over to our house to use the phone if they ever needed to ring anybody. So it became this hub of village gossip, basically, inadvertently, because it's an old council house. So you could hear everything that was being said in any room. So like we knew all about elderly relatives' health, illicit affairs, who was breaking up with who, and then when the local Chinese opened the dietary requirements of the estate, it was all kind of known to us. But we didn't monetize that data at the time, unfortunately. But of course, it's all changed since then. The transformative impact of tech can be seen in three different spheres, I think, on the personal level, in terms of how we interact with each other, from relationships to social networking with our friends, on the commerce level, about how we trade with each other and the different opportunities around that, and also in the public level, about how we organise collectively, both in politics and in security, etc. But we've also seen the dark underbelly of that in the last couple of years that's become increasingly apparent. So in social media, things like bullying, etc. In commerce, the impact it's had on high streets, and politically, of course, with malicious actors interfering with elections and people building echo chambers around themselves. So today we're going to discuss these issues. I have two great panelists beside me here. Nuala O'Connor, the president of the Centre of Technology and Democracy, I know has been involved with the programme before and has helped you discuss some of these issues. And Rob McDowell, a former commissioner with the Federal Communications Commission and an advisor on these issues. So I'm going to hop the ball in here and let the two people here to start off with some introductory remarks. So perhaps Nuala, you might lead the way.
Well, it's good to be here, and congratulations to all of you on a great summer. What terrific work I see summarized, and I feel like I've talked to this class 3 or 4 times already, and I don't even know what I can still say to add to that already. But since we're at a point of personal reflection, Norman's at an inflection point in his career. You've all heard that I'm going on sabbatical next week for the rest of the summer, which is super exciting. But it's caused me to step back and reflect on what's meaningful. And as you all are just starting your careers, as Norman said, there is good work to be done, and there is so much more work to be done on these issues. There is a line from the Talmud that is, "You are not required to complete the work, but nor are you permitted to abandon it." So you will all go on to great things in your great careers. I'm super excited to follow some of you. And we've stayed in touch with all of our CDT, Center for Democracy and Technology interns from WIP, who are doing great things. And let me just put a fine point on that. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the conventional space of government, although many of us, all of us on this panel have served in various levels, in various ways. But there is great work to be done in the private sector, in academia, and certainly in civil society and advocacy on these issues. And we need all voices at the table. We need everyone rowing in the direction of what is good and great about technology, what is good and great about society. I'm going to sound very Bushian from my administration, which is, we're going to pick a side. Are you for or against democracy? This should be an easy question, and yet apparently we are doing some soul searching in this country and around the world. Democracy is in retreat and in retrenchment in many jurisdictions, not alone or to escape the United States. And we need to decide, is our work as individuals and institutions, whether government, private sector, or civil society, in furtherance of democratic values? Are the things we are creating, the technology, the code, the software, the hardware, furthering democratic values? And what values are we espousing? Because we in the United States, in our tech sector, have been blissfully unaware of the fact that we are exporting a U.S. form of governance and U.S. values, certainly on our First Amendment, which I dearly love, and yet also recognize has limitations and creates consternation in many parts of the world. The good news for this conversation is we have a lot more in common with each other than we do with many other parts of the world about what is important in setting boundaries between self and state. But I think we still have a conversation to be had about how far we will allow the state to go into our daily lives, into our private lives. We also have to ask some questions about how far we are allowing, or where are we setting the boundaries between individuals and private sector institutions. I think it is not an unimportant moment that the FTC has announced a $5 billion fine against Facebook. Those of us who are jaded enough to say that's no big deal, really? How jaded are you if you say that? It is $5 billion. I do understand how that fits in the size and scope of that company. And also, it is a monumental moment for individual data protection, for the respect for the human value of the rights of the individual to self-determination in their digital self. And also, stay tuned for next week or the week after, whenever the details of that announcement come, because I think it is going to set the next course of the next 10 years or 20 years of how companies are expected to use personal information. So I think we've done some great work in the United States. We were playing a little catch up. We were ahead in the 70s and we were behind, and then with Europe in the GDPR, and hopefully setting together a course of framework for how we treat each other in the digital world. But we can start with self and how we treat each other with dignity. I thought the opening remarks were so excellent, and I'm reflecting on the fact you all know that I was born in Belfast and so experienced firsthand, perhaps you might say, the loss of dignity when dealing with government as a Catholic growing up in Andersonstown. My family is from the Ardoyne, if any of you know where that is. That has profoundly shaped, as I've already told you, my sense of advocacy to the government and setting a strong boundary with that. But we have questions about the private sector as well, so I'm happy to discuss those on the panel, and happy really to talk to any of you about what lies ahead, because that is so much more important and exciting than what lies behind.
Robert?
Thank you. That's hard to follow, but I want her to do most
My
of the
intention.
talking. So, exactly. First of all, Cade Mil Falcha to Washington. I'm a little bit late because you've been here for a while. But and then also, welcome to the DC bar. You probably thought drinks would be served. It's not that kind of bar. I'm sorry, but maybe later, after hours. So a little bit more about myself, which is interesting, having heard some of these wonderful and very eloquent opening remarks. So my name is Robert Malcolm McDowell. My great-grandmother, Mary Agnes Sullivan, immigrated from Ireland after a couple of years in London, so from Kerry to London to the States. I married an Irish girl, a daughter of an Irish immigrant from Southwest Cork, so she has lots of aunts and uncles and first cousins in Rosscarbery. If you trace the McDowell lineage, so she's quite the genealogical expert, so up through Ancestry.com and such, you will find McDowell's going through Northern Ireland. Fairly common name probably for those of you in Northern Ireland. So I have Shea and Sullivan on one side. Mom was Catholic, Dad was Protestant. We have the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And then when I got my DNA tested, I'm a mutt. Total, I'm apparently 0.8% Hispanic. So
Spanish Armada.
It's good. Yeah, well, I speak Spanish. So that's maybe that's why. Yeah, it could be the Spanish Armada thing, right? The legend of the Black Irish. But anyway, so a little bit of a fellow in a blender here, but also studied the Troubles a bit when I was in university. And after I took the bar exam after law school in 1990, visited Northern Ireland for the first time. And that was, of course, during the 300th anniversary of the Battle of the Boyne, so that was an interesting time to be there. Tensions were high. This was 8 years before the Good Friday Accords, but absolutely fascinating. And there was a remark earlier about going there on holidays. So I was walking through, I was either in Derry or Belfast, I can't remember which, but I was stopped by a British Army patrol, and I thought I looked pretty American. Blue jeans, a red L bean windbreaker, and things like that, with a camera over my shoulder. But I was stopped by a British Army patrol, and there was a private from Scotland who was questioning me, and very respectfully, but it was sort of a comic moment. And he asked me, so, where are you from? And so, the United States. And what are you doing here? And I said, well, I studied Northern Ireland in college, and I'm here after I took the bar exam, which is something you take after law school, and I wanted to see it for myself. And he said, you're here on holiday? And I said, well, yes. He said, why the F would you come here on holiday? And so for him, it was a hardship assignment, I guess. He probably really didn't want to be assigned on that billet. For me, it was absolutely fascinating. But here we are, a lot has happened, and excellent remarks about everything that has happened since '98. More work to go, right? More distance to travel, but there always will be to improve the human condition, doesn't matter where you are. Some of the reactions I had to some of what's been said already is there will always be reasons to be divided. It doesn't matter where in the world you were from. You can always find an excuse to feel divided from other people, to have strong differences of opinions that might even elicit violence or a feeling of violence or rage. So you have to choose to want to work with people. So in the long arc, the trajectory of human history, there's always conflict, and there always will be conflict. So for the rest of your lives, it doesn't matter if it's Northern Ireland, Irish, the Republic versus the North, Protestant, Catholic, whatever. The world is full of this, right? And so you need to make a conscious decision. It is your choice whether or not you want to act in a divided way or try to work together with people as best as you can. And there will always be differences. I'm looking forward to the discussion on privacy, or do we say privacy? I'm not sure which way I'm supposed to say. But I had some introductory remarks on that, but I will save those for the substantive discussion. But thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here. Wear my shamrock cufflinks, but also Statue of Liberty as well. So blend it all together.
That's great. Thanks, Robert. You mentioned there, Nuala, in relation to the US catching up in terms of regulation. As you know, Ireland kind of sits at the nexus between the United States, who are the hub of the Big Four in tech and the kind of hub of technological innovation, and the European Union, the largest market in the world of over 500 million people, but have taken a far more aggressive approach in a lot of ways. At the moment, for example, the Commissioner Vestager, on one hand, a kind of feisty Danish commissioner who's decided to take on big tech in her views, and she launched today, for example, an antitrust investigation into Amazon. Previously, has levied significant fines against Google, etc. Do you envisage America taking a similar role to the GDPR that was rolled out last year, for example, in Europe? Or
Well, as far as I'm concerned, that is a great gap in the United States federal law. That is, we do not have an omnibus federal privacy legislation in our country. We have a sectoral approach. I have given several speeches at the International Data Protection Conference where I went through the list, and it takes a long time, actually, to go through all the lists of all the privacy law in the United States. That's a bad thing. That is a bad thing for the individual consumer or citizen. It's a bad thing for our global dialogue on privacy and data and the digital economy and digital self. So I think I have great hope, whether it's within the next year or two before the next presidential election or in the year or two after that, that we will see landmark federal privacy legislation. I think this is the arc of acceptance, adoption, awareness at the federal level. The U.S. states, as you've seen, have been getting into the action, which is very exciting. They'll have a mishmash or kind of whack-a-mole approach to figuring out how to do this right. And now the FTC fine and a number of important litigation cases, including some going right to the Supreme Court, are all factors and forces leading to the U.S. adopting a more comprehensive and more significant privacy law than we have currently. As I may have said to this team already, it was California's new law, GDPR, and Cambridge Analytica were the three legs of the stool that has led us to this incredibly important point in this conversation. Not to say that the Obama administration, the Bush administration, even the Clinton administration had good people working on these issues. It is also just the gestalt, the moment in time. We should also give credit to Helen Dixon, who is the Irish Data Protection Commissioner and an old friend who is doing great work and making, as someone tweeted out, and she's making no one happy. Because in the hard jobs, you often find, I find this in my job on a daily basis, I'm making no one happy, which means I'm probably doing my job because I'm balancing two very difficult factions. She is doing great work kind of bringing the companies to the table and having a hard conversation about how we do this right. I would say the global dialogue also reflects power and size. People are concerned about power of a large private sector company. I am skeptical, as again I may have said to this team before, that competition and antitrust are the right tools. I think data protection and privacy regulation may be more appropriate and salient tools for an economy that is driven by personal data. And also tiny little companies like Cambridge Analytica can do a lot of damage with a whole lot of data, and they would not be affected by a competition analysis. So I think we need some new thinking and not necessarily applying old tools to new problems. But I think that there is a vibrant and growing global dialogue of which the United States can and will be increasingly a part. And Ireland has been the fulcrum and will continue to be an incredibly important player because of the number of data centers in the Republic and in the North. And I'm optimistic we'll get to the right answer eventually.
Robert, do you think that the regulation would stifle innovation here in the States if it follows a similar model to Europe?
So the number one stifler of innovation is uncertainty. Usually once there are rules and it becomes more clear, that helps. But innovators, entrepreneurs tend to hold back on capital investment and experimentation in the market when they're not quite sure if they're running afoul of some rule that may not be written yet or may not be enforced yet. So, and let me come back to that in a minute, but so you're absolutely right. Ireland is this interesting bridge, has been a tech center. It's a knowledge economy, an island economy, did a lot to model itself after Japan in that regard, so it became a tax and regulatory haven and is very entrepreneurial, right? So highly literate society, well-educated, gift of the gab, among other things, right? So that's all good, and that helps. So a knowledge economy really helps tremendously, but the low tax structure and friendly regulatory structure really helped tremendously. When it comes to what might happen here in the U.S., you know, I thought once the GDPR actually became a thing that may end up becoming a denominator. I'm not going to say lowest common denominator, but a denominator, a bit of a standard by which other countries or regions start adopting rules. There are things in it that I'm not terribly fond of, which I think are contrary to our First Amendment, but that's me as an American. And then we have the California law, which of course Nuala referred to, that goes into effect in 2020. So what we face in the U.S. is this balkanization. People from the Balkans don't like it when I use that word. Fragmentation, splintering, et cetera, of the laws, which, you know, the internet is a borderless network of networks, right? So from an engineer's perspective, there is no border. It started in the, you know, when it was privatized in the 90s, there was almost a hyper-libertarianism about absolutely no rules at all of any kind governing cyberspace. It's a different universe unto itself, to the point where you could buy and sell drugs, you know, totally legally because it was on the internet. That's it's its own space. That obviously over time, things have started to change. Easier questions, child pornography, things like that. But as we look across the globe, every nation state has its own culture, its own values, sometimes its own authoritarian regime, and there are different motivations for regulation. In our country, thanks to our federal system, the states have some jurisdiction here unless the federal government, the federal Congress steps in to preempt. And I think Nuala's absolutely right. That absolutely has to happen in this country. Right now, as I sort of check in on this issue with key members of Congress and other key industry players, I don't see that happening real soon, not this calendar year anyway. Will there be a rush to have legislation done in 2020? I don't know. I mean, each political party would like to say they've done something. Big tech is a terrific whipping boy for both sides. It's been interesting seeing, and this is beyond the scope of your question, I apologize, I'll shut up in a minute, I promise. But what has been interesting is in this country you had an interesting sweet spot politically for the tech industry. And by the way, my law firm Cooley is centered in the Bay Area, in the Valley. It's known as a tech law firm. We have offices from China to Brussels and places in between, but we need to get one on the island of Ireland, but I'd like to be there for the ribbon cutting myself. But in any case, big tech, or tech in general, was in this political sweet spot in that Democrats were sort of the friends of the Valley, Republicans didn't like to regulate things, and then 2016 comes along, Cambridge Analytica and other things in both wings, left and the right, fell off of that aircraft, that coalition, overnight. And public opinion started to change, which is people really weren't paying attention to what was happening with their data prior to maybe the 2016 elections, and now there's more public awareness and not quite sure what's happening to it. There's some icky things out there. They really like all of the apps and the wonderful aspects of what's the internet offers, but they're not quite sure what they're trading for that, and is that so good, and they want some protection. So I don't know if there will be a path forward here in the next, next year's, there are very few legislative days. Congress takes off to go campaign. You'll have the political conventions in the summer. So if it doesn't get done by July 4th of next year, I don't think it's happening.
In a broader sense, do you think that the role of technology and originally was seen as something that would drive on democracy, but with the Cambridge Analytica scandal and, for example, then across the globe, you see how it's been used to stoke racial tensions in places like Burma, etc., and organise violence and so on. Is there a risk now with the concentration of power in a few companies that they actually do represent a threat to democracy? And what steps does the US have to take to address that? And Ireland is kind of caught, as I said, in the middle between the European approach and the US one. And what steps do we have to take to move along that? So, for example, your friend Helen Dixon moved from, it used to be the head of regulation in Ireland was above a shop in Portlaoise, which is kind of middle of the Midlands of Ireland. Is a bit out of a flyover state, I think is how Americans would describe it basically. But anyway, it's moved on and a lot more resources have gone into it. So what steps do we have to take to address that?
Bob, you want to go first? Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I thought you were going next. Sorry.
I'll go. That's fine. I think the issue of speech and content moderation is even harder than privacy. Privacy at this point is a known known, as we used to say in government. We know the scope and the shape of it. We know what the companies need to do. It will get done. We'll toggle back and forth between should we, shouldn't we write a law, and we'll eventually get it done because people understand the parameters. As Rob has correctly pointed out, the public sentiment on Cambridge Analytica, on, if you see is it the new Face app, the thing that makes you older? Why would anyone want that? I'm sorry, but anyway, I'm like, I want the younger one. That people are much more aware, much more sensitized than they were even 2 years ago. And contrary to what you saw in the Zuckerberg hearings, members of Congress and staff are far more savvy and are asking hard questions and working with both sides of the aisle and both chambers of Congress here. So I am very, almost, I wouldn't say overconfident, but sanguine about privacy and data getting to the right place in the next several years. Speech and content are so much harder. They're so much harder. And we've got issues of hate speech, of terrorist content, as Rob pointed out, child sex trafficking, pornography, and as you point out in your question, anti-democratic activity and states-sponsored. Let's talk about what it is. It is propaganda. When it is state-sponsored misinformation, it is not just cute. And this is the problem. This is actually the real politic of the issue. We in the United States have a thing called the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and at the State Department, we have counter-terrorist speech and programs that go all around the world, seeding radio and television and all this sort of stuff. We are back on our heels, and frankly, so is most of Europe, in fighting that information warfare in the internet space. People have been dismissive of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Reddit, and who just had a big issue with counter-terrorist speech? Something I wouldn't even have thought of. Tumblr. Who even uses Tumblr? Sorry, Marissa. People were dismissive of those as fora for human beings to connect, and they were using it to connect and not in good ways. And other governments, non-democratic governments, have been using these tools for years to seed misinformation, disinformation, hatred, and contempt for the other in this country and around the world. The interesting factoid, though, there's really recent research that shows Eastern European consumers of information online do not get fooled. They are not fooled by the crud they're seeing. Americans are like, oh, that's horrible. I can't believe that. The Pope said blah, 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 whatever. Eastern Europeans at a rate of like less than 20% would click through in false information purveyed by Russia or China or whoever it was. Americans at a much, much, much higher rate were consumers and believers of this content. So we have an information war on our hands. I'm sorry, I sound big and scary now. And it is bad. It is an existential threat to democracy. And just because you don't think Facebook is a serious tool doesn't mean it isn't government operated. So I love the framework that the team has come up with. Government actors, what are you doing as you deploy new tools as a government, and what are you doing as you're analyzing them in the private sector? And threat to democracy or furtherance of democracy, let's put it in the positive light, should be one of those tools by which we are analyzing our own actions and others.
And Robert, what kind of tools do you think are necessary to protect democracy? What are viable tools to introduce now? Is it too late to regulate the Wild West? Is the genie out of the bottle?
The genie is out of the bottle in a lot of ways. Again, let's go back to the engineering of the net, and especially the mobile internet. It is loosely coupled. It is designed to be easily accessible. It is designed to work around choke points. All of those are wonderful for consumers for ease of use, but to Nuala's point, it's also easier for regimes, authoritarian regimes, to use it to plant seeds of disinformation, maybe to monitor, surveillance, et cetera. So you have technology, the technology genie's out of the tube, as we saw with the Arab Spring, was that almost a decade ago at this point?
2011, yeah.
Getting old faster. So we saw in Egypt, the Egyptian government tried to shut down internet connectivity. But within a couple of days, as I recall, maybe even less, might even been within hours, hardworking engineers were able to work around that, and consumers were able to figure out ways around that. So, and especially with wireless technology, so the spectrum offers an unlimited amount of pathways to connect with one another. So that can help democracy in an idealistic way, optimistic way. You would think the dissemination of information and crowdsourcing, essentially, that people will be able to weed out what is myth versus fact, what is disinformation versus truth. That's not always the case, and they may not be able to do that. People seem to be gravitating towards confirmation bias and seeking out information or opinion that reinforces their own closely held beliefs rather than looking at something else that might challenge their beliefs. So there isn't a way to regulate that. I mean, I think in China, we're seeing the Chinese try hard to have their own regional internet that's highly regulated in order to control the information flow to their citizenry. But there are millions or hundreds of millions of workarounds in that every day, and holes in the Great Firewall. So the genie is out of the bottle in a lot of ways in terms of technology and the ability. But these issues that we're talking about, whether it's the stability of governments or subversion, are going to be with you the rest of your lives, as is the privacy issue. And the public policy in liberal Western democracies is going to evolve. It's, if you're interested in this area as a matter of public policy or engineering, you've got a lifetime of employment ahead of you, because these aren't going to go away. There's not going to be like someday the U.S. Congress passes a law, a president signs it into law, and then we're done. Or the EU, and then we're done. That's it. It's all over. Well, didn't we solve that problem? There are going to be more and more problems and factual scenarios that we can't even envision, and that's especially true with the Internet of Things, as you have trillions or quadrillions of things maybe embedded in you physically, all around you, in conveying information and processing information. Combine that with artificial intelligence and other such things. There are questions out there we can't even contemplate right now. So keep that in mind. It's very fun in a way and scary in another way. So.
I'm going to respond to something Rob said, because absolutely right. There's been a notion of tech exceptionalism in the United States, that somehow this sector or these things are different, unique, and above the law. Nobody's above the law. Let me remind everybody in the city, nobody's above the law. No thing, no person, no institution. We are a nation of laws, we hope. And what does that mean? That means there's been a pushback on any attempt to regulate or even examine the problem. I think the internet has grown up, and you're 25 years old, WIP. CDT is 25 years old at the end of this year, and the internet is 26 or 27. The commercial internet is past its quarter century. It is time to reevaluate the actual infrastructure, the tubes, how it's architected, as Rob said, for complete openness and connectivity and community, and that's wonderful. And also the policy and political architecture around the internet, both in the United States, in the global dialogue, in your own country. And think about, is this still serving the needs of the people? I always like to say it's not the Internet of Things, it's the Internet of people, or at least it was supposed to be. Is it serving the needs as we look at them now? And Rob is right. I share that concern about I'm a fundamental First Amendment kind of person. I believe the government should stay out of our speech because that is a huge risk. And also, I think there is a need for the companies to do more in their transparency and accountability about the speech that they are purveyors of. I think that you're seeing a call for radical transparency among institutions of all kinds. In this case, an understanding of the values that are embedded in the algorithmic decision, in the embedded biases of the thing, whether it's an Internet of Things object or whether it is a platform for speech and connectivity. Rob is right. We are moving to the polls on either side of the political dialogue. Is the algorithm, my favorite company, not, I'm kidding, Twitter, is the architecture of how tweets are retweeted and amplified and information shared exacerbating and reinforcing extremes? Is it providing value to only the loudest, the snarkiest, the most outrageous? Is it self-examining for the existence of bots, of trolls, of true misinformation, of state-sponsored malinformation, disinformation? What is it, the social, I'm just using, I don't mean to pile up on them. They are both the best and the worst part of my day in many ways. But what is the kind of social value, the political value, the corporate social or civic responsibility of this tool to the democracy? And these are questions, to their credit, these are questions we ask them and their leadership every day, and all of the big tech platforms, and they are thinking hard and working hard, and also there's still more to do.
I'm going to open it up to the floor at the moment. I think we have a roving mic. Yeah, that's great. So if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand, and will you have it to state your name and where you're from? This gentleman here in the centre caught my eye.
This is a roving mic, you called it. So does that make her the Irish rover?
Hello.
Sorry.
Hi, I'm Ronan. I'm a politics student at Durham University. My question just going off what was said before, how we're consumers, but one thing I've noticed is that we're not just consumers anymore, we're producers of data. And I think about Facebook, like their business model is our data.
Right.
So my question is, actually, I was researching, the Supreme Court said before that it was on a company who interfered in a campaign, and they ruled that our money under the First Amendment is freedom. So I'm wondering what the panel thinks about saying that our data is our freedom and how we can address that. Thanks.
Can I start?
You can start, sure.
I love that question. Thank
You
you,
usually like to
Ronan.
go last. But go
Sorry,
ahead.
what?
No, go ahead.
I get the first and the last
Yeah,
word,
sorry.
right? That's how
in
we
the middle.
roll,
There we
right?
go.
This is how we roll. All of my ex-husbands think that too. Anyway, yes, I think you are your data, right? So I'm probably an ultra-European thinker on this because I think it's not only a human right, it is actually a part of self. I think data is part of self. It is an extension of self. It is not only a widget that I transact, a good, a property, which would be the US construct of data. It is not only a human right, which is the European construct of data. It is actually self. And the example I always use is, you can hear my voice. I am transacting with my voice right now. It is part of me. It is actually a biometric. And also, you and this nice people on the video, watching the video, have rights in that now as well in that transaction, right? Because I am transacting with my data for value. For value because I love WIP and we love you and I'm going to get great interns for the rest of my life. And so that's the deal I am striking right now, right? What is the deal you're striking with Facebook? You're getting a free platform. You're getting access to all your friends because that's where they are, for better or for worse. You're dealing with advertising. And most people get that deal. What they did not get in the Cambridge Analytica scenario is that it was going out of country, out of company, and for a purpose that was so far attendant to the original deal, the onward transfer was egregious and extreme. And it was beyond the transaction and beyond the understanding of any reasonable human being in that transaction. Listen, I've written more privacy policies than people have never read, right? No longer is it okay to say, well, it was in the privacy policy, you didn't read it, that's your fault. That's not okay. That is not a reasonable construct. There's a book called Surveillance Capital, which is worth a read, although it's really, really long. And it gets to the idea that a large amount of money was made off of your data. This is the robber baron of the 18th century with the natural resources of oil and gas and the like. Now we're talking about the natural resource of human beings and data. It's time to rebalance that equation.
Robert?
So, actually, I should have said at the outset, by the way, and with Cooley LLP, my law firm. I'm not speaking on behalf of any client today, so they can get mad at me equally because I'll speak my mind. So it is interesting. So here we are at a point where actually in Europe, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you think I'm wrong, and I know she will, that in Europe you had a notion of privacy where I think there had been a lot more thought given of online privacy before the U.S. started, policymakers really started thinking about it. And I'm not saying we didn't think about it over here, but the notion that, as a classical liberal might say, there's the sovereignty of the individual, right? And everything Nuala just said, which is everything about you is yours, you possess it. And if you surrender that up, it is in a transaction. It might be an implied transaction, and you may not be thinking it's a transaction, but it is. And I think over here people are starting to become more aware of that, and maybe over in Europe, which drove politically the GDPR, they're more aware of it sooner. We did have privacy laws and privacy enforcement, and if I had some friends up here from the Federal Trade Commission, they might take issue with what I just said a little bit. But I think in the US now we're going to see more of a, wait a minute, it starts with me, and if I dish this out to you, there's got to be something in exchange, there's got to be transparency, full disclosure. Nobody's ever going to read the privacy agreement. Okay, all right, so I don't read. Right, so there's not enough time, not enough time in the universe to read all this. Just click, yeah, whatever. But I think things are changing in that regard. It's an excellent question, and this will evolve forever. Again, there will not be some law signed someday, even a constitutional amendment that fixes this. I think we're going to always, this will always be in beta format, essentially, which is we'll always be revising privacy regulation.
Shane, do you have a question of it?
Yeah, I can just.
Yeah.
A thespian,
Yeah.
deep, read with the diaphragm.
I'm Shane Carmichael. I'm a graduate of the class of 1997.
Great.
So just first of all, just to say thank you. I said this last night. For me, as the old guard, when this was program about conflict resolution, it's really just exciting to see such a contemporary, modern, and global conversation. And my thanks on behalf of all of our alumni to both of you for giving up your time and support. I wonder if I could sort of flip the conversation a little bit. So I have the great privilege of sitting on the UK government's advisory board on safer gambling. And it's really interesting, actually, the idea of public good. So that idea that Steve Jobs talked about computers being bicycles for the mind. The reality is today that we know a lot of these technologies are not deployed with that in mind. Public good is not at their heart. And that raises issues for us around public health. And one of the challenges that we have as a advisory board of government on safer gambling is how do we protect the vulnerable? How do we protect people who perhaps don't even know they're vulnerable to, in our context, gambling? And actually one of the constraints is access to data and the insight that data might provide to us to intervene with public health and public good in mind. I'm just interested, how do we strike that balance, given that we know we rarely do things that are good for us, and often it's too late to realize that.
Yeah.
This is such a great question. Such a great question. First, I wanted to put a pin in the idea of unintended bias and ferreting out unintended bias towards marginalized communities or vulnerable communities or communities of color or certain classes or genders, because with embedded AI in the walls of our homes, the dashboards of our cars, the walls of our kids' schools, we need to ferret that out. And the first step is transparency and then accountability. But I want to drill down on the public health question, because you have seen a debate in the United States just in the last couple of months about platform responsibility for anti-vax dialogue. And as a mom of three and a stepmom of three, this is near and dear to my heart. And that is a public wellness. We have gone from almost eradicating, I think it was measles in this country, to seeing outbreaks in major U.S. cities this year. Talk about vulnerable. I mean, you can use that word to apply to a lot of people, but babies, unvaccinated babies who are too young to be vaccinated, getting sick and nearly dying because other people do not believe that vaccination. And at what point can you force people, right? Because we are a society based on freedom and freedom of association, and that is where people are finding this, is online and offline. So a number of companies have taken fairly draconian steps to say we are simply not going to allow information from certain sources or from certain people to be published at all or to be republished by other human beings in that community. And they hit with some backlash from First Amendment advocates and that dialogue. And I say you are acting, back to Rob's very good point about the kind of tech exceptionalism and believing that we don't need to be regulated in the tech sector. When you are affecting the lives of this many human beings, you absolutely have a responsibility. And just as this country did a complete flip on smoking a few years ago, we are probably going to see a big pivot point on information, at least relating to health or clearly defined scientific sources. The challenge in this post-truth environment that we're in right now is there's little agreement on what the right source of that information should be. I'm hoping the National Institutes of Health or some of our federal science boards would at least be an agreed upon source of information. I hope, and yet we'll have to see. This would actually argue the point that a private sector actor can act more swiftly and more agilely. They do not have to wait for public sentiment. They can simply take a stand. And that pivots me to my last point, which is there is an increasing call, at least in the United States, for corporate leadership, for CEO and C-level decision-making to adopt social values and social mores and take a stand. You see it on LGBTQAI populations and rights. You see it on gun safety, that certain stores are no longer selling guns and no longer will share information in that milieu. You're seeing it on the sale of alcohol and tobacco in a number of places, even up to of age people. You're seeing it in the opioid context here in the United States. So people are holding accountable private sector where they're not getting the redress out of their government actors. They're holding the private sector accountable. And I think that's great. I think that's as it should be. We are all responsible for our actions. So.
But will it be as effective as government-led regulation? Like their issue, for example, in the UK, they've introduced a law to curb access to online pornography, so over the age of 18. But the question there is not so much is it appropriate for the state to be involved, but actually how effective it's going to be, because people, as you said before as well, people can bypass so very easily with IPNs and all that. Right. So how effective will the regulation be? Right. Maybe something, Robert, you might talk about. Yeah.
So, and I'll try to be concise because I think there's some other questions here. So there are, how do you regulate human behavior? How do you protect a citizenry? How do you protect the most vulnerable? Some of these constructs or principles don't have to change because it's something that's online, right? And there's a balance here, right? This is why I'm hesitating, is it's not easy. But to kind of rewind the tape a little bit, I have always analogized the internet to fire. So fire is wonderful, it gives you heat and light, it can cook your food, boil your water, great ambiance provided by fire, and it can burn down your house and kill you, right? And you could use it as a weapon. So it depends on how you use it. The internet is a tool like fire or other tools. It can be used as a tool to exploit those who are addicted to gambling or addicted to whatever, or who are prone to extreme political violence, et cetera. So there are laws and regulations and ways of looking at human behavior, humans using a variety of different tools. And so whatever those principles are that seem to work or not work, but try to weed out those that don't work, can be applied. So think of the internet as a tool, and yes, it does change things. I'm not saying it's just the same, but we don't have to reinvent things from scratch necessarily.
Any other questions there? Stand up. No.
You're going first. I've gone first every time.
Okay.
Rob's going first.
Hey, so thank you very much for being here, first of all. So my name is Dara, and I'm interning on Capitol Hill at the moment. And on Tuesday, I got to go to the Banking, Housing and Urban Affairs Committee hearing on Facebook's new cryptocurrency.
Wow.
And there's a lot of concerns about this at the moment, between, the chairman of the Fed talking about, its effect on monetary policy being put in the hands of private companies rather than government, and then other concerns in relation to privacy, AML, and things like that. I'm curious to know, what are your opinions or attitudes on how this cryptocurrency will act? Will it be, something that we should be very concerned about when it comes to data and privacy, or will it be something which kind of improves the payment system for the future? So
excellent topic too, by the way. So, and again, my law firm represents a lot in the fintech space and cryptocurrency space. I'm not speaking on behalf of any of them, but there are a number of things of value since we were cavemen and women, maybe even before that, right? You trade a ham for a potato, or hopefully more than one potato if you're negotiating well. But anyway, so that is a thing of value. You think modern day, you have coupons, you have online digital coins that aren't cryptocurrency necessarily, could be in a video game. All these things are things of value. Cryptocurrency is fascinating because it can speed commerce. You can cut out middlemen. You could cut out the distortions and manipulations by governments in terms of the value of things. You're trying to get a thing in exchange for another thing, or a service in exchange for a thing, or whatever the case might be. Cryptocurrency can actually create tremendous efficiencies, and that actually can help those who don't have enough money in the developing world, let's say, have a bank, essentially a banking system, right? So there's tremendous upside, and back to the remarks incorporated by reference regarding FIRE. So, but there's a huge downside too, a potential downside, which is it's terrific for money launderers and terrorists and anyone who is trying to avoid taxation or whatever the case might be, to hide because it's not regulated. I think it reminds me tremendously of the internet space in the mid 90s as it was being privatized in this country. Again, back to sort of the hyper-libertarianism of which is, don't touch this. This is none of your business, governments. Just let us do this. And that sounds great at first, maybe. It's a nice bumper sticker. It sounds good if you say it fast. But then you have some very real-world problems that arise. So it'll be a space, I will guarantee you, that'll be more regulated tomorrow than it is today. And will probably look a lot more like traditional banking regulation at the end of the day. But I think it'll stimulate and disrupt a lot of governments and international monetary regulations, et cetera, and cross-border transactions. So that could be a good thing if the net effect is to increase efficiency, and therefore that increases productivity and innovation, and ultimately could help improve the human condition, right? When you have those principles at play. But it's going to be messy and hard in the meantime, so like all this stuff.
What do you think? Will it undermine democracy by removing a core plank of government policy?
I think it refers back to your question originally, which is, are you taking out of the hands of traditional government and putting into the private sector some kind of authority or power that we have historically thought should belong in a government, in an open government that is voted for by the people? There was a great tweet on kind of a related subject, which somebody said, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to do these Kickstarters every time somebody who had a lot of medical bills or whatever, or that we could do a Kickstarter to fund a government program, and somebody tweeted back at them, yeah, we do that every April 15th, it's called taxes. So like reinventing things and tech being a disruptor is a great thing. And also there are some things that are working or maybe need to work better, but not be completely disrupted and dismantled. The banking system, I think, might be one of those. Healthcare could be certainly vastly improved and also is a public good. I think the one takeaway I also have for this team is, the older I get, the more I realize there are motivations that have nothing to do with people, what is right and what is wrong. And it may be just that my power is going to be diminished because you now have new power. So is it old line bank regulatory people who want things to stay the same? We have a huge project on student privacy and data and education technology, and we do health privacy and data and a whole bunch of other domains. There's almost nothing harder than redoing education policy in this country. Like banking is easy compared to that because parents like me are crazy. We want things the way we want them, and the old line structures of education, even in this country, are fairly entrenched and also need to be tremendously reimagined. And I have seen some conflict in that domain that puts I used to be a bank regulatory lawyer way back in the day, puts bank regulation to shame. I mean, it's almost hand-to-hand combat about about what framework for educating our children is going to be. So I think there's old power and new power. There's disruption that's good and disruption that's just disruption to make somebody else rich. And so which is it?
Interesting. We have time for one more question from the floor. Yeah. Please. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this talk. My name's Owen Finn. I'm from Galway, and I'm working in the Bricklayers Union. But I've just been fascinated by this talk, and I was on that panel or the team that was discussing the tech charter. And thank you for your input on that. But my question, it might be a bit strange, but basically on regulation for tech and for data privacy and everything, what country do you think has the best model in the world? And if there are any countries in particular that have regulatory models that we wouldn't have heard of, what do you think is the thing we should learn from other countries? Where would you ideally set up if you were setting up a tech or data company, or you analyzing data right now? Thank you.
So she's going to give you a better answer because she's going to be more familiar with international regulation. But I will say this, if you just look at history, why is Silicon Valley, or the Boston Route 128 corridor, or Austin, Texas, or Northern Virginia? Those are sort of 4 big tech hubs. You have to look at tax and regulatory structure. Europe, the continent of Europe, didn't have Silicon Valley, right? And I think that's in part because of the tax and regulatory structure there. So we haven't talked as much about ex ante versus ex post regulation, but ex ante, before the fact regulation, sometimes mother may I, you have to go to government to say, can I go do this? Versus ex post, which is have at it, and if you cross a line, we will enforce against you. And there are debates as to what's the best way to go, depending on the circumstances, right? So for the time being anyway, the internet ecosystem appears to be sort of dominated by American companies. I think that's changing. You have someone, you're going to know this, but of the top 10 largest in terms of market cap internet companies now, I want to say 4 of them are Chinese, maybe it's something like that. So there's an ascendancy there. That can be based just on 1.4 billion people in their country, on top of a lot of CapEx. So you can have a lot of power behind that. It's certainly not because it was a classical liberal democracy. So whatever made Silicon Valley or the US internet economy so strong probably should be emulated. Not that it's perfect, it's not perfect by any means, so there's always room for improvement. So as far as I know, it's probably whatever that model was would be the best one to use internationally, if you're looking for a place to incorporate. So.
Yeah.
Well, there's a really easy answer to who's doing it best, and that's Ireland, of
Ah,
course,
well.
right? Well, in all seriousness, there are elements of Helen's great leadership in espousing a European-style human rights framework and also allowing for greater innovation. So Rob's right. If all you're trying to solve for is size, scale, and making a lot of money, yeah, and I obviously worked in Silicon Valley, and I'm
entrepreneurialism,
a
though,
big
too.
fan. And I think you're right. I think it's the tangential things like tax and trade and other policies, and also kind of the entrepreneurial spirit that is so powerful. I'm thinking of a boss I had once, actually in the government, not in the private sector, who said, "Ask forgiveness, not permission." I love that. And it's from a remarkable person. I will not tell you it is because you would not expect it from him. But that sort of lead forward, I don't want to say lean in because that's a little cliched at this point, but the leaning forward is good advice for your careers as well. I would tell all the kids in my office, bring me the answer, don't bring me the problem, right? So I think the answer is no one's doing it perfectly, right? I'm sorry to say. We don't have the right, we're maybe a little too in the libertarian, Silicon Valley framework. I would say the GDPR is a little heavy-handed, frankly, and again, thinking of what are the motivations. As long as the motivations really are to protect the individual and dignity and equality, great. If it's just because I'm pissed off because that company is based in another country and I'm going to stifle them and make the data stay here because I'm trying to get more jobs here, like what's the meta message here, and what's the underlying motivation on the part of the regulator in any country? So, I hear great things about Estonia. I'm a little skeptical. And the great part about my job is also not having to constantly say, I'm not speaking for the client. This is awesome. I'm so enjoying that part of this job. And also weirdly, we can be great cheerleaders for technology and also say, you know what? It doesn't do that. There's a lot of hand waving about Bitcoin and blockchain and cryptocurrency and blah, blah, blah. It's not ripe. There's a lot of hand waving in Estonia and elsewhere about online voting. No, we are not ready. The internet is not ready. It is not secure enough. And we have a whole project on that.
We
funded by
tried
the
it at home a couple of years ago. It didn't work
yeah,
out
you
for
know,
us.
it's fine for voting for my PTA president, my Parent Teacher Association president. I'm fine with that, right? If that goes wrong, that's not a big deal. The president of the United States should not be voted for based on an internet vote. And the potential for, we already saw 21 states in the United States with evidence of intrusion in the last presidential election. No votes were changed, but all we need is for people to doubt that their vote was counted accurately for the beginning of the demise of the democracy. So no, that is overhyped. So somewhere between, it's all going to be on the internet and we should all just go back to writing on paper is the right answer.
Great. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I'd like maybe just for final closing comments, any advice to this next generation of young leaders that face into the next 25 years and the technological challenges that lie ahead for them. Robert?
You're going last, as always. First and
Exactly,
last,
that's where
as always.
that was agreed to.
So, first of
in
all,
the
what a
contract.
wonderful program to be selected for. So, congratulations. I should have said that at the beginning. And what a tremendously bright future each of you has, and wherever you are. It really is incredible and very heartening and inspiring to see such sharp minds here. So, I think you're hearing a lot of what I'll say tech chauvinism between the two of us, that everything, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. To us, everything is tech related. But I will say, so I'm on the board of a public policy school, my alma mater, Duke University. And I like to tell the dean of that school, you can't name me one area of public policy, or actually throughout the university, that isn't affected by technology, by what I do, what you do. And so it doesn't matter if you want to go into medicine or law or construction or whatever. These issues are going to affect your life, or you're just a consumer. These issues are going to affect your lives and your children's lives and grandchildren's lives, and they're going to be hard. And you remember that analogy about fire. It can make your life a lot better, but you have to be really educated and handle it very carefully. So I tend to be an optimist. I think net, it's all for the good. There'll be a lot of bad there, but when you balance the two, or weigh the two, I should say, good will prevail as always. So Gaurav Magut, thank you for having me today, and look forward to maybe speaking with you after the panel.
Great. Thanks very much, Robert. Nuala?
Question was advice, right, for them?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm answering the question
Did I
for a
not answer the
change.
question?
No, you did.
okay.
I've been bloviating, and I
No,
just want to make sure I actually answer
famous
the
for not
question
actually
for a change.
answering the question.
That's part of the art of
didn't want to
politics.
bring
He
it
is
up.
an expert and the leader in that. Life is not that long. I mean, people say, "Oh, it's a long life. You've got a lot of chances." What you do matters. The choices you make matter. And how you do it matters almost as much as what you do. This is something I tell my kids at home and at work, the kids at work especially. The dignity with which you treat each other, the kindness with which you treat each other. The Toni Morrison quote, I think it's hers, was, "People will forget many years later what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel." DC is getting smaller and smaller the longer I spend, and I run into people in all places who I worked with or worked for or worked with or whatever. And people remember. I think we're Irish. We all have really long memories in a lot of ways, so I say that. It could be a bad thing as well. But humility at all stages, curiosity. I've made any number of what seem to be really crazy career moves in my life, and people have always been like, "Huh, why is she doing that?" And it's because I'm kind of curious, like, how would that be if I tried that? That is the most fun, right? It doesn't have to be the title or the job that you expected, and sometimes it's even a little lower down than what you expect. But if you're learning, that is exciting. And I always say, in this economy, we're all moving so fast, it's a year to learn, a year to do, and anything else is bonus. I don't expect people to stay where they are forever. We're all moving around very quickly. And that could be a good and bad thing, and we can talk about that as well. But I think it, like I said, it's humility, it's humanity, it's cultural competency, which is why I give you all the credit for being here. I wish I'd done more time in different countries earlier in my career, but being respectful of difference, but not being bound by it, and being able to leap across those divides and meeting people of all kinds is the greatest joy. So it's been a joy to meet all of you. I wish you all the best in what comes next for you, and I'm very, very, being with them makes me so optimistic about the future. So thank you for all you're doing.
Great. No, that was great. I really enjoyed that. Very interesting conversation. So, Gurmeet Magwif, the two. The great thing about WIP is that you get to meet interesting people at the forefront of their field. I like that on two levels. One is just the information. It's always great to have a chat with people who just know so much about a topic, and I get a lot out of that. And then on a personal level, it's just very nice to meet people who are friends of the program, who take an interest in Ireland and in young people and the role they're going to play in the future, and to see how you've gone along with your career and all that. I also find that inspiring, to be honest. So I also enjoy that stuff. So listen, thanks very much for taking the time this morning to come to speak to us all. I really enjoyed it. I think everyone else did. So just a
Thank
small
you.
token
so
of our
much.
appreciation.
Thank
Gurmeet
you.
Magwif.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
You're going to throw the book at me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely.